No one in Deadwood Crossing had ever seen a child put on the auction block before. Not until that hot, bitter morning when Mara Bell, just 14, was dragged into the town square with a torn shawl around her shoulders and a starting bid of $2 silver. Her uncle, red-faced and drunk, shouted louder than the auctioneer, demanding the girl be taken off his hands, fair and legal. Most in the crowd watched like it was sport. Some laughed. One man offered his lunch in trade. But just as the bidding reached its cruel peak, a stranger stepped forward, a tall man with no accent, no dust on his coat, and a coin that gleamed cleaner than anything in Deadwood. He didn't ask her name. He didn't even look her in the eye. He placed the winning bid, then turned to the sheriff and said, "Have her brought to the stagecoach, stop at noon," and left. The sun beat down on the town of Deadwood Crossing like it was punishing the land for being too dry, too dusty, too full of people who'd long forgotten how to feel ashamed. The square outside the courthouse hadn't seen a real crowd in months, but today the benches were full, the windows cracked open, the children told to stay home. Everyone wanted to see it for themselves, even if they'd never admit it later. On a crate nailed together from whiskey boxes stood Maribel, 14 years old, face pale but chin held high. Her hair was tied back in a rough braid, her shawl torn at the edge, her boots too big for her feet. She wasn't trembling, not yet. Beside her, waving a ledger with exaggerated flair, was Roy Bell, her uncle by blood, but no more family than the butcher's stray dog. He was red-eyed, sweat-stained, and slurring the words he spoke too loudly. "This girl eats more than a mule and works half as hard," he barked. "She's got no parents, no claims. Her debt's mine, so she goes to the highest bidder." There were murmurs in the crowd, a few laughs. Some folks looked away. Others watched with that hollow kind of curiosity that never leads to kindness. The sheriff leaned against the post office door, arms crossed, saying nothing. The auctioneer, a small man with shiny boots and a yellow tooth, cleared his throat. Starting bid, $2 silver. Fair for her age, strong bones, fair face. Mara didn't look at the crowd. She stared just above them, at the clock tower ticking far too slow. $2.50, someone shouted. "No, three, 3.5. Each bid felt like a stone thrown in slow motion. Then a voice broke through the noise, calm, unrushed. $10. Every head turned. At the edge of the crowd stood a tall man in a clean coat and dark gloves. Mr. Calder. No one knew where he came from, but he didn't blink, didn't move. Just held up a single gold coin. $10, he repeated. The auctioneer stammered. "Sold." Roy blinked like he'd just sobered. "You serious?" Calder turned to the sheriff. "Have her delivered to the stagecoach, stop at noon. I've made arrangements." Then he walked away. He never looked at Mara. Never asked her name. She stood alone on the crate as the crowd melted into whispers, wondering if she'd just been saved or sent into something worse. By noon, the square had emptied like it never happened. The crate was gone. Roy was gone too, off to drink away the gold he'd been handed without looking back. Only Mara remained, standing beside the courthouse in a clean gray dress someone had forced her into. Her hair had been brushed, her face washed. She looked more like a parcel than a person. The deputy, young, embarrassed, and silent, escorted her to the stagecoach stop just past the edge of town. He said nothing the whole walk, and when they reached the coach, he passed the driver a folded note and handed Mara a small satchel of hard bread and jerky. "Don't ask questions," he said. "Just go where they tell you." She climbed aboard alone. No ticket, no destination. Just the stranger's name written on the envelope, Calder. The ride was long and winding. Deadwood shrank behind her, swallowed by red hills and wide sky. The coach passed over dry creeks, through quiet valleys, and across sunburnt fields where no one waved. At each stop, passengers got on and off, ranch hands, peddlers, quiet women with babies. But no one looked her way. Calder never appeared. The driver never spoke to her. On the second day, the coach pulled to a stop at a fork in the trail, far from anything resembling a town. The driver turned and jerked his chin. "This is you." Mara stepped down slowly. Her boots hit dirt as dry as ash. Waiting there beside a tired mule and a cart full of flour and canvas was a tall woman in a wide-brimmed hat and dark skirt. Her skin was sun-worn, her hands rough, her gaze unreadable. "You're late," the woman said. Mara swallowed. Where? Where am I going?" The woman didn't answer. She just turned toward the trail, climbed into the cart, and nodded for Mara to follow. The girl hesitated only a second before climbing in beside her. The mule groaned, the cart creaked, and they rolled forward into the hills without another word. Behind them, the stagecoach vanished in a cloud of dust. Ahead of them, the path curved into woods, where the trees stood quiet and tall, like they'd seen 100 girls just like Mara come and go. The trail wound higher into the hills, where pine needles carpeted the earth, and the sun filtered down in patches, golden and quiet. The cart creaked with every turn, the mule plodding steadily like it knew the road by heart. Mara sat still, watching the woods close in around them. She had no idea where she was. No name for this place. No hint of what Calder wanted with her, if this was still even about him. After over an hour, the trees broke into a clearing where a small farmstead sat folded into the earth like it had grown there on purpose. A stone chimney puffed smoke. A garden stretched behind the house. A low barn stood at the edge of the slope, its door propped open with a wagon wheel. The whole place looked simple, quiet, lived in. "This is it," said the woman, the first words she'd spoken since the fork. "Help with the sacks." Mara clambered down and lifted a bundle of flour from the back. The woman moved like someone who didn't have time to explain things. She unloaded, stored, swept the porch, and tied off the mule without ever asking Mara's name. Only once did she pause long enough to say, "You'll sleep in the loft. Supper's at dusk. Water's out back. Don't wander." Then she disappeared inside. Mara climbed the narrow ladder to the loft. The room was plain, just a cot with a faded quilt, a chair, and a cracked window that looked out over the trees. No lock, no bars. But it didn't feel free either. It felt paused. At supper, she met the only other soul on the land. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, with soft brown hair and a gaze that never quite landed. He didn't speak, just nodded politely and helped set the table. The woman, who still hadn't offered her name, ate in silence. Bread, beans, dried apples. Finally, Mara asked, "Why am I here?" The woman chewed slowly. "You'll rest tonight, work in the morning." "That's not an answer." The woman looked up, her eyes like riverstone. "It's all you need for now." That night, Mara lay awake listening to the frogs singing near the pond. She pressed her fingers into the quilt and whispered to the ceiling, "You better not be a prison." But no one answered. Only the quiet creak of the wind in the rafters. Morning came with bird song and wood smoke. No bell, no call, just the clatter of dishes and the scent of frying onions drifting up through the cracks in the floorboards. Mara rose slowly, half expecting someone to burst through the door with shackles. But no one came. No orders were shouted. She found the woman already at the stove. The boy, Finn, she'd heard the woman call him once, was sweeping near the back door. Still silent, still watchful. The woman handed Mara a bowl of porridge. "You'll help with the garden, and laundry after." That was it. No questions about her past. No mention of Calder. Just tasks, one after the other. Mara wanted to argue, to demand answers. But there was something about the woman's voice, quiet, unshakable, that told her questions would fall like pebbles into a dry well. The work wasn't hard, just steady. Pull weeds, sort potatoes, scrub linens on the washboard until her fingers went raw. No one watched her closely, but she never felt alone either. The house breathed like a thing alive, always warm bread rising somewhere, always tools being sharpened just out of sight. At midday, she caught sight of the woman at her writing desk, sealing a letter with a stick of blue wax. No address was spoken, no name mentioned. The letter was handed off to a passing courier on horseback, who gave a small nod and disappeared into the trees. Mara began to notice the rifle behind the kitchen door, polished and loaded. A second one above the fireplace. There were knives in the cupboard, not for cooking. On the back porch hung a bell on a leather string. Not for decoration, for warning. That night she asked the woman, "Is this a safe house?" The woman looked up from her mending, eyes unreadable. "It's a stopping place." For who? For people who were sold before they understood what that meant. Mara stared. "And you?" she asked. "I don't get asked questions," the woman said and went back to stitching. Outside, Finn was drawing on the barn wall with chalk, rough sketches of birds, trees, faces. When Mara passed, he handed her a piece. She hesitated, then knelt and drew a small, jagged star. It was the first mark she'd made in days. The next morning, she didn't wait to be told. She just started working. And no one stopped her. It was late afternoon when the dogs started barking. They hadn't had a visitor in the 8 days since Mara arrived. Not a single soul. The trail was hard to find if you didn't know where to look, and harder still to leave a message if you did. But there he was, a lone rider, tall in the saddle, lean and dusty, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and a silver scar slicing down the left side of his cheek like someone had tried to erase half his face and failed. He rode a pale gray horse that looked too well-fed for a man this far out. The woman stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face gave nothing away. "Garen," she said. He didn't tip his hat. Need a word. They spoke in private by the well. Mara couldn't hear the words, but she could read the lines on the woman's face. Tight, focused. Not surprised. Not afraid, but aware. Later that night, after Finn had gone to bed, the woman handed Mara a canvas satchel. Inside was jerky, a compass, and a small wrapped parcel of dried herbs. "If I knock once and tell you to go," she said, "you take the North Trail. Ride hard. Don't turn back." Mara's fingers gripped the satchel. "Why? What's happening?" "There's a man in town. Said he bought you once. Believes you still belong to him." "Roy?" The woman didn't answer. She didn't need to. "But I was sold again," Mara whispered. "To Calder. You know that." "I do. And Calder doesn't lose what he protects. But men like Roy, they don't respect paper." The wind creaked the shutters. A cloud passed over the moon. Mara didn't sleep that night. She lay with the satchel beside her pillow, boots on her feet, one hand on the floor for balance, just in case the call to run came before she was ready. But it didn't. Not yet. 2 days passed with no knock on the door, no sound from the trail, no word from Garen or Roy. The threat hung like heat in the air, unseen but felt. Still, the chores didn't stop. The goats had to be milked, the garden tended, firewood chopped. The rhythm of the farmstead kept on as if nothing had changed. But Mara noticed the woman keeping the rifle closer now. Finn stuck nearer to the house. Even the wind seemed to carry less noise. Then just after breakfast on the third morning, a courier rode in from the ridge. His horse was foamed at the flanks. He handed the woman 2 parcels, one wrapped in linen, the other a letter sealed with blue wax. The woman didn't open it. She held it out to Mara. "It's for you." Mara turned it in her hands. The seal was pressed deep, the script on the back simple, Mara Bell. She opened it slowly. The paper was thick, the ink neat and careful. "Miss Bell, I once watched a girl younger than you be sold in a town not unlike Deadwood. I stood in the crowd and did nothing. That moment has never left me. Since then, I have done what I can quietly without names, to make sure that some are spared what others were not. Enter, you were never property, not to your uncle, not to me. You do not owe me thanks. You owe yourself freedom. Stay or leave, you choose, that's the point. See." Mara stared at the letter for a long time. Her hands shook, but it wasn't fear this time. It was something else, like the first breath after being held underwater for too long. She folded the letter and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. That evening, As the sun dipped low over the hills, she took a piece of chalk from Finn's jar and walked to the barn. On the side where Finn's drawings had faded from rain and time, she drew a small circle with a line through it. A symbol. Her mark. She stood back and stared at it, not because it was beautiful, but because it was real. Hers. Inside, the woman watched from the porch, said nothing, but her face softened. Autumn rolled in without asking permission. The air turned crisp. The garden shifted from greens to roots and squash. Mara no longer needed to be told what to do in the mornings. She rose with the light, rolled up her sleeves, and moved like she belonged. She didn't ask about Roy again. She didn't need to. Garen never returned. No riders came looking, and the satchel, once packed for escape, now sat forgotten beneath her cot. Finn had started handing her the chalk without being asked. They drew side by side on the barn wall each afternoon. His drawings were getting bolder: birds in flight, stars, horses in motion. Mara added a new symbol every week: a name in the corner, a trail through trees, a figure standing on a ridge with her arms open to the sky. One evening, as smoke curled from the chimney and the last apples were pulled from the trees, a wagon appeared on the trail. Inside it, a girl no older than Mara had been when she arrived. Thin, quiet, her hands were balled in her lap like fists made of paper. Mara met her at the porch with a bowl of warm soup and a folded blanket. The girl didn't speak, just stared. Mara gave her a small smile. "You're safe, you'll see." The woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them both. Her face unreadable as ever, but her silence now felt less like a wall and more like a hand resting on someone's back. Steady, unseen. There. That night, as Mara settled onto the porch steps, she pulled the letter from Calder out of her apron. She'd read it so many times the folds had begun to fray, but this time she didn't read it. She struck a match, lit the corner, and held it gently until it curled into ash in her palm. Not out of anger, not out of defiance, but because she didn't need it anymore. The truth had already taken root in her. She was no longer someone rescued. She was someone who stayed.